Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Upper House. Also, welcome to those of you who are joining us online as well. My name is Melissa Shackelford. I am the Director of Program Curation and honored to be hosting you all today. Upper House is a center for gathering and learning, serving the University of Wisconsin-Madison and beyond through curating experiences that connect faith, ideas, and communities. I've been hoping for the opportunity to share Steve Prince with our community since I was first introduced to Steve and his work in around 2019, partially because it's hard to describe Steve in mere words. Yes, Steve is a printmaker, sculptor, and art evangelist, a title he may expound on this afternoon. He is a charismatic connector and dynamic presenter who vividly narrates history and the present with layered symbolism that nearly pulses off the page. He is the Distinguished Artist in Residence and Director of Engagement for the Muscarelle Museum of Art at the College of William and Mary. A native of New Orleans, Louisiana, he currently resides in Virginia. Prince received his BFA from Xavier University of Louisiana and his MFA in printmaking and sculpture from Michigan State University. He is represented by Zucot Gallery in Atlanta, Georgia, and has created several public works, including an 8x8-foot mixed media work titled Lemonade, a Picture of America, that resides at the College of William and Mary, commemorating the first 3 African-American resident students at the college in 1967. Most intriguing, however, is Steve's ability to involve others in creating art that is both remarkably personal and inextricably communal. Throughout his work, Steve elevates the tensions of individual story for the sake of communal healing. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Steve Prince.
Thank you, Melissa. Good afternoon, everyone. Indeed, it is both a privilege and an honor to come before you this afternoon. Thank you for welcoming me into this beautiful upper house. Before I get into my presentation, I first like to give honor to God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and to each and every one of us that is covered under His blood. I want to make sure that I extend a thank you to the leadership of this house and for welcoming me into this space and have the opportunity to share. I want to extend a special thank you to Melissa and to Cam for making the welcome here so beautiful. And I don't know all the names, and that is one of my Achilles' heel. So there's a saying that goes along with that. That basically forgive me, but know that my heart is good and it thinks of you. It goes something like that. I paraphrase it poorly, but nonetheless, you know what I mean. I'm just so thankful and grateful for spaces like this and organizations like this that work together and people work in community, and they all are focused on really making a deep impact upon the hearts and the lives of all the folks that come through this space. And so I feel honored to be able to come in here and to be part of the ecosystem of this space. So thank you. Before I go into my presentation, I want to make sure that I do a little bit of ground setting in terms of what I'm going to share with you and what you're going to see. Just to give you a more explanation in terms of my title as Director of Engagement and Distinguished Artist in Residence at the Muscarelle Museum. I oversee all kinds of programs working typically in education and arts education to go out in the community, and I'm working with all age levels. And I mean all age levels. I'm working with preschoolers all the way to retired seniors in our community. And we have quite a few in Williamsburg. So I'm going to those centers and spaces. I'm inviting people to the museum, but most of my work is going out into the community. And this is the first time in my career that I have not been connected to a classroom on an everyday basis and a semester basis. So I miss the classroom, I miss that space, but God has opened up another opportunity for me to do other kinds of work. and be able to utilize the skills that I have garnered over the years in all the different spaces that I've been, I see them as an accumulation. And so how do we take those gifts and how do we use them? How do we give them back? Or as my professor from undergrad says, how do we pass it on? So that's key. The artwork that you're going to see in this presentation, all of it is created by me. As Melissa basically said in the bio, is that I do a lot of different media. And so I'm working a lot with drawing and paintings and printmaking and sculpture. I look at art in terms of art making as a linguist would, in terms of thinking about the various different languages one could learn. I look at the same way in terms of artistic pieces or artistic work that I do through a lens of as if I were thinking about those as different languages I was trying to speak. So that is something that's very key and critical to my artistic practice. One of the main things that you're going to see in terms of my work is a process called linoleum cut. And for those of you out there who don't know what that process is, and those who are out there in cyberland, linoleum cut is a process where I work with a floor tile-like material. I make an intricate drawing on the surface of it. I take cutting tools and I cut into the negative space around my positive lines. I roll it up with ink. I put paper on top. I run it through a press, and bam, you have a print. That captivated me when I was an undergrad at Xavier University of Louisiana, and I have never been able to detach myself in the process because I just got so captivated by the idea that I can make multiples. I was like, I can do it again? Oh my goodness. Another one? How many can I do? As many as you want, Steve. But it will depreciate the value. Okay. So it's that kind of thing. So I was really captivated by it. So I ended up making a bunch of prints, but it was very much aligned with the way in which Martin Luther utilized the 95 Theses in the Gutenberg press and disseminates a message. I have the ability to take and send a message to multiple places. That means I can have the same art show in 10 or 15 different cities at the same time. That means I could just spread this work all over the place. And so that was captivated me. So that idea of being an art evangelist is not a title that I made up for myself. It was given to me by a good friend of mine named Phil Shasma, who is the owner of an organization called Icons. And he would introduce me that way at different talks that I do, particularly in Grand Rapids. And basically it stuck. And I began to use that title as the work in which I do. So I wanted to give you that pre-talk before I got into the presentation and give you a little bit of information about what you're going to see. This piece right here is an image titled Sankofa Seed. It is a brand new sculpture that I created at William & Mary University. It is 10 feet tall and 4 feet square at the base. For those who do not know what Sankofa is a mythical bird that comes out of Ghana, Africa. The bird's body moves forward as if it's moving forward into history, but it looks back. It looks back into the past because it understands the whole notion that those who forget their past are doomed to repeat it. I believe my work is hinging upon that idea that I'm trying my hardest to get us to remember to remember. It is so important. So therefore, I constantly run us through this process of dealing with a funerary tradition that comes out of the home place where I came from, which is New Orleans, Louisiana. And the funerary tradition is broken up into two parts. The first part of the funeral is called the dirge. You see, the dirge is the mournful tune that is played for someone as being laid to rest. The musicians would purposely play music for the congregation and all those who came out to witness the loss of that individual. And they really want us to cry, to pour out, because they understand how important it is for us to mourn. Now, you're probably wondering, say, well, why would you attach onto a funeral idea as the philosophy of your work? It's because I know that the dirge is embodied in everything that we know and we understand. The dirge is on the individual level, on the micro level. The dirge is on the macro level, the communal level. The dirge is the everyday. The dirge is the things that we can't see when we look at each other. The dirge is the stuff that we harbor deep down inside of us, and we just put on that smile and we interact with somebody and we say, how you doing? I'm doing fine. But you know I'm not doing fine. There's something wrong on the inside.
Something is stirring on the inside that we can't see many times. But if we are sensitive, if we draw closer to each other, we might be able to see it. But that requires an open heart. That requires an open mind. That requires that we are able to see each other not through the cloak of what is embedded in terms of my skin or my body or how I may look in terms of my stature. It has to do with how do I look at another person and see the human nature in them, that they may be hurting on the inside and that I have to look a little deeper and I have to draw a little closer in order to understand something about them and them to understand me. Look at me. Don't be caught up in terms of the history of the past. See me now. I'm right here. That's what I'm pushing for in my work, brothers and sisters. That's what I'm digging for. That's why I go into the studio. That's why I travel across the country speaking, because I feel the urgency. I feel the urgency of now. Because I'm only here for a little while. That's why I go to the dirge, because the dirge is the hurt. The dirge is the pain. You have to embrace it. Yes, it's hard. And I know what it feels like when you got to shut down sometimes and cut away from people and you have to go into that little private space and you have to just sit there for a little while so you can get you and regroup. So then you can get up and go back out again. I know what that feels like. And I know you out there know what it feels like too. But that's the stuff that we don't talk about because we cloak it over. We want to feel good. We want to feel happy. We want to feel all the wonderful things. We want to disassociate ourselves with things that are considered to be bad. We want everybody to know of us as wholesome, as good. That's the projection that we try to put before everybody. But I know that that is not the truth, that we are all flawed, that we all fall short. I know that I am a flawed human being. I'm trying my best to be a better man, to be a better Christian, to be a better friend, to be a better brother, to be a better human. So I'm going to walk you through this piece because it will explain to you the dirge in the second line, but you got to get in a little closer to the imagery. You have to understand the construction of the work. You see, in the top right-hand corner there is a grouping of people that I created, and I call them the horsemen of the apocalypse. As we know that those are not the horsemen of the apocalypse because I took the horse and the man, I conflated them, made them into one. This is Steve symbology. This is Steve mythology. All right? And so they're carrying in their hands a 1950 Chevy Coupe as if they're taking it away from the gravesite, as if to rebirth it. You see, the name of the piece is called Bird in Hand, second line from Michigan. And I called it that because I was making a piece that was utilizing the dirge in the second line as it relates to New Orleans and what it went through in terms of Hurricane Katrina. But it also represents what was taking place in Detroit in terms of the automotive crash. And I thought I can take something, the healing balm of those traditions, I thought I can deposit it into New Orleans. I thought I can deposit it into Michigan and use the art as a healing nature to hopefully catalytically do something that will create change. You see, as it moves through the compositional space, now you're able to see the dirge and what it looks like because you can see it on the faces. You can see it on the bodies of the individuals inside of the compositional space as they're moving across. But there's a brother at the bottom of the composition, and he's laying down on the ground, a white handkerchief. This happens to be one that I made, a lino cut on the surface of it. But he's laying that handkerchief on the ground. And laying it on the ground, it is symbolizing that something has died, something has went away. If you look to the left of it, you'll see that there's a little X, and it has the shape of a head of a bird. And it's like an X as if it's an eye. And the reason why symbolically I use that is because of what it comes out in terms of the tradition of New Orleans. You see, at funerals and weddings, they will release white doves. At a funeral, they release 3, God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. At weddings, they release 1, because that's the 2 becoming 1. It got expensive within the African-American community, and so that idea gets translated into a white handkerchief. So when you see a person dancing and moving in New Orleans with that white handkerchief, they are the embodiment of the Holy Spirit. And that movement of that handkerchief is just like the bird that you will see flying and moving its wings. Oh, that flight element is very deeply embedded within the African American songscape. You see, the flight was about getting away from those spaces of pain, getting away from that dirge, and trying to find a space of peace, of restoration. They weren't just simply looking for a space in terms of going to heaven. No, they were looking for that on earth. They were looking for the shackles of that pain and that hurt to be removed from them, that they were able to celebrate the richness and the trueness and the beauty of life right now with the hope of renewal into the afterlife. They wanted all the whole scope. They didn't want to end it right then. If that was the case, then we wouldn't have these issues in terms of history, because you would have had mass suicides that would have happened throughout history in this moment. Say, dang, it was like 9 million people from Africa committed suicide. What in the world happened there? So I want to give you a little taste of the dirge. The brother lays down that handkerchief upon the ground, symbolizing that death. You can see inside of his expression the hurt and the pain of that loss. But as we move forward, in the center of that composition I showed you originally, I purposely put a white male on the bass drum. I put it there because when we think about jazz music in America, it is the commingling of European and African traditions. It is America's most unique form of music. It is the creation of this land. It is the creation that comes out of a lot of pain. Again, that word comes back up. It's the creation that comes out of a dirge. The drum that he beats upon, the word it is upon, is called trime, which is the oldest African-American municipality in the United States, located in New Orleans, Louisiana. It is a space where the continuation of a thing called the bambula, or the circle dance, where it continues on to this day, but it's very alive within the black church. When you see a person move into a space where they go into a shout, that's that spirit that was there, that was carried from Africa into America, and that is still alive. You see, the European bands are very linear based, but the African groups are not linear based. They're circular based. And for the naked eye, for those who don't know and understand, they're like, well, it looks kind of chaotic. No, it's not. It's organized chaos. It has a rhythm. It has a structure. It's just different. And that's the beauty when we look out and we see other cultures and we see other traditions and we see other rhythms. And it's not to look at it and say, well, what's wrong with them? Why are they acting that way? There's something wrong. No, it's just different. Embrace it. Embrace the beauty of that difference. Embrace the beauty of the way in which it gets you to see things a little differently. And so once that person is laid to rest, the music goes from a mournful tune and it flows into a celebratory tune. And if you're not ready for it, and when you go to New Orleans, which I'm doing a good job, hopefully, is preparing you for it. So when you go there and you experience one of these, you will know how to move. And now I'm sitting in the church looking like, what in the world? What are they doing? We were just crying a minute ago. So now you need to know what the second line sounds and what it feels like. Thank you. So when we look at the front of that composition, no longer do we see the mourning. No longer do we see the crying. We see the expressions of joy, the expressions of happiness, the expression of community coming out. Some of you may be asking the question about the second line. The question may be, well, what is the first line? The first line is a life here on earth. The second line is a life with the eternal hands and arms of the Father. But it has a natural meaning. The first line is the family associated with the person that is being laid to rest. The second line is the community that comes out in support. You're this community. We're the community that's supposed to be coming out and girding those who are in peril, girding those who are hurting, girding those who are going through the dirge. And it may be both of us are going through the same thing on some levels. So operatively, we end up supporting each other and not going out with the self-righteous call to say, well, I got everything together. Let me help those poor people over there. As if to strip away from yourself that you're going through some, as my friend Phil says, issues too. That's part of the work that we got to do. That's part of the way in which we have to see and we have to unsee. That's part of the ways we have to program and reprogram. That's the way in which we have to look back, yet still moving forward like this Sankofa. Remember to remember. You see, I call the piece Bird in Hand, second line for Michigan, and all my Michigan people, they always throw up that hand and tell me where they're from. I finally asked somebody, I said, why y'all do that? It teaches that in the schools. I said, okay, it makes sense now. And then they'll point, oh, I'm from here, I'm from this part. Well, the bottom part is affectionately known as the hand or the mitten, and the top part is known as the Upper Peninsula or the UP, or also affectionately known as the bird. I told you the name of the piece is called Bird in Hand, second line for Michigan. I connected two spaces of the United States together, and the symbols were already there. They were laying right before me. I went to grad school in Michigan. I went to Michigan State, and I didn't realize that connection while I was there. But it was after I left, and I looked back, I saw so much more that I didn't see when I was in it. And that's an important thing that we must remember all the time. The importance of going there, experiencing, going away, but don't forget to look back. I forgot to tell you how big it is. It's 9 feet by 20-foot drawing. And it took me 150 hours to draw it, about 22 days and about 52 pencils. Yes, I did count the pencils. I had everything laid out. It was a job. I went into the studio. I would clock in and clock out. I did it all on a chalkboard. And I had music on Spotify. And everybody would congregate, come down the hallway, because I was at Montgomery College working on this. And they made their way down. They said, oh, we knew you were here. We heard the sound. And then I would walk them through, and I would tell them about this drawing. I would go through each part of it. I started it on the left, and I worked my way to the right. And I made my way right, and I made my way back to the beginning again. And I made this drawing. It was beautiful. Time, and I did it in an open space where everyone could see its progression every single day. And that was important in terms of sharing that way. Now, I happen to be an artist that can do that. I know that every artist doesn't have that ability to do that or feel comfortable with that. And that's not a mark on you. That's just my personality. I have no problems drawing in front of you, and you're not going to bother me. And matter of fact, there's times where I can actually just shut you completely out and you're right in the room with me. I have that ability. It's like I can go any place around the country, and it's been proven I can sleep anywhere. People are like, oh, you comfortable? I'm good. I'm good. If I got to sleep, I'm sleeping. That's it. If I want to stay up, I'll stay up. I stay up to 1, Cam. So, And so that's me working in the studio. I did this for my artists because I wanted y'all to see this part, to see the behind the scenes stuff. And it also just for regular people, everybody that don't do art, you need to see what's behind the scenes, what's behind the door, what's behind that curtain. Because many times you just see the work that we put on the other side, but many times you miss the labor that goes into it. But I think there's something beautiful in the labor, because I think the beauty of the labor in terms of doing the artwork is the same work that we must do communally and socially, and how we must deal with the issues that are going on around us. It has to be that rigor. It has to be where we feel sore at the end of the day, and we need to stretch. That's the feeling that we need to feel in doing this work. I think back, when I think about the dirge, Bessie Mitchell in 1948, you see this woman was a seamstress living in New York, and his last name was English, and he and 5 other guys were falsely accused of killing a white store owner in Trenton, New Jersey. They were randomly pulled off the streets and accused of killing this man in the store and put into jail and ran through what's called a kangaroo court. And for those who don't know what a kangaroo court is, it is one where they just basically run through the motions because we need to put on the books what took place, but they already came up with the verdict. They were going to execute these men. The sister heard about it, and she's like, there's no way in the world that my brother could have done this. Absolutely not. That's not his character. I know him. She went to the NAACP, and she went for help and tried to get them to help with this situation. They investigated. They didn't see much they could do. She didn't give up. She then went to this communist party that was being led by this guy named William Patterson. And William Patterson went and did some investigation, and he made it into an international outcry about what was taking place, and basically shamed America into checking the case out and seeing what was happening, and found that they coerced those guys into confessing that they did something that they didn't do because of the threats upon their life and their families that they were trying to protect. That's why they confessed that they did it. But I believe that Bessie is us. Or she represents the work that we must do, as I talked about that second line. She represents that, she was a seamstress. That was not a job. She was not trained as a lawyer to go and do that kind of work, but the woman knew that in her heart of hearts that something was wrong, something was off, and that it didn't fit. And so therefore, I believe she took that needle and thread and she created something new that doesn't exist, so don't look it up. She created a Bessie stitch and stitched those lives together inside of that cage/jail cell. And those men were set free. I believe that's the same issue that was for Rosa Parks, as I affectionately titled this piece, Rosa Sparks, because that's what she did with her life as she sat down on that bus in Montgomery. She sat down to cause others to rise up. You see, I put some elements on her that may be a little hard to see, but I will point them out. She has a little shield upon her body and has the letters AOG on it. And AOG stands for the armor of God, because I pulled that from the book of Ephesians, where Paul writes that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and things in high places. And he encourages followers and the believers to put on the whole armor of God. And so therefore, if you look at her, you see her legs are crossed, her arms are crossed, and she's squatting down that seat as it buckles underneath the weight of her body. She turns her head towards the bus driver and like, I am not going to be moved. Any psychologist out there will know that this woman is not going to be moved, because she's telling you everything. She ain't listening to you, and she ain't going to move. So you might as well just give it up. So they arrested her, and that was a spark that started a year and a half protest against the busing system, where nobody in African American was riding the buses. They refused to ride the buses. Meanwhile, the buses are riding up and down the streets empty. Bus drivers still need to be paid. Gas still needs to fill those buses, and they relented. I show you the sign, I am, penetrating the bus, which alludes to the I am a man signs that were carried by the bus sanitation workers, the sanitation workers down in Memphis. But I took away the "and man" part and I left it with just "I am," because just like Moses, I believe that we must go before God and say, what shall we tell Pharaoh? Should I call you? And God will say to our hearts, I am sent you. And that's the covering that I believe that is over us. And we talk about the armor of God that protects us to do the work. We come into this place in terms of worship spaces all across this country. And what are we doing it for? We're doing it for the equipping and the strengthening of us and preparing us to do the work that we must do. And we must do it generation to generation. We must teach the young, teach the old. Everybody must know what has happened and what needs to happen and how we must do it and what is our covering as we move. That's what we need, folks. So when I think about that, let's not get caught up in the celebration of Rosa Parks and what she did and say, oh, that sister was bad. Oh, she did something good. Oh, don't forget, because a few months earlier, a young man coming down from Chicago traveled south to Money, Mississippi to visit his family. And he apparently makes some gesture to some woman inside of a store that caused a group of men to come to his house and abduct a 14-year-old boy from his bed. Beat him, shot him, tied him with an engine block, wrapped him with barbed wire, and threw him into a lake. And 3 days later, they found him. They exhumed his body and shipped him back to his mother. Mamie Till got her son and said, everybody needs to see what they did to my child. Open that casket. That's the dirge, folks. That's what Sister Mamie had to feel. And she wanted everybody else to feel the dirge too. But the beauty of that is, on the other side of that, it caused a movement, a wave across the nation. And the questions came ringing across the nation. What are you doing to your children in America? What's happening over there? And people who were in the country were seeing what's happening in the communities, and it woke them up a little bit. It should remind us of something, because I'm telling you about something in the past, but I'm also telling you about the present. The pandemic is reminding us of something, of the things that have been happening. And for some people, the moment in which we're feeling right now in terms of the pandemic, it feels new. Like, oh my goodness, I didn't know it was like this. But for some of us, it has been a continuum. We have been feeling it the entire time. It is no different. I don't feel any different. I feel the same. The same outcry I had 25 years ago I have now. That's a problem, but I still had that same cry, and I'm going to keep crying it because I know that that's what my life is supposed to do, and that's what I'm supposed to do with this artwork. And that's what I believe we're supposed to do with the callings of whatever we are called on this earth to do. It is not just for our own edification. It's not for just putting the clothing upon our backs and give us great trips to go around the place and have all this wonderful luxury. It is not simply for that. It is no problem for us to have a good time. We had a wonderful time sitting down at the table and telling stories and eating dinner together, breaking bread together, and connecting and bonding. That's a wonderful and beautiful thing to do. But meanwhile, there's another world that's happening outside of us that we must be conscious of. And when we see our grace, it is not just simply to bless over the food, it is to bless over those and so many who are suffering, who do not have the bounty that we have. That's the beauty of what we're trying to do. That is the calling, I believe, my brothers and sisters. And so I want you to remember that Emmett Till, which is symbolized by the E.T. on that hat, and X was from Malcolm X. In 1965, he was murdered in Audubon Ballroom in New York. And the crown on that, that's not for me. That crown is for Martin Luther King, who was assassinated in 1968 at Lorraine's Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. And ironically, you know what his last sermon was about? Who is my neighbor? He pondered that question, and he dug deep into Christ's parable of the Good Samaritan. The man with his hands up, and that's for Michael Brown, hands up, don't shoot. The one with the hoodie on, that's for Trayvon, who was killed down in Florida. Same person that Barack Obama said he could identify with. He said, because that could have been my son. He has the letters K-O-O-L on his body. Not for cool, baby, cool, but for a pack of cigarettes. You see, Eric Garner was standing out in front of the store selling singles. Now, mind you, a pack of cigarettes in New York, $17.10 at the time when he was murdered in front of the store. He was selling singles because he was trying to make a little extra ends for his family. And the deep irony that I find about it is that he was selling tobacco. One of those ingredients that was built, this country was built upon. And the person that looked a whole lot like Eric Garner was working fields, one of the harshest fields to work in, next to probably rivaling working in the sugarcane field. Let us not forget, folks. But I don't want to leave you in that space of dirge, of hurt, of pain, because hope is embedded in the child as the child sits in the lap of the mother, symbolizing the new life and symbolizing our job to teach the young, to teach the children, to teach them the truth. Stop cloaking the truth from their eyes and their ears and their hearts. Open it up. This is a snippet from a piece that I'm showing right behind it, and the name of the piece is called 9 Little Indians. And I have that same AOG patch shows up again, that armor of God. And I've used it over and over in my work. I've used it since 1999 in my work. It's been a recurring kind of symbol. And I've accepted it. Matter of fact, I'm working on a dance piece with a dancer by the name of Leah Glenn. And we're working together on making this piece and commemorating the Little Rock Nine. And I'm making the costumes for all the dancers. But I also want you to remember in 1957, the integration of public schools that took place in Little Rock, Arkansas, when they went into Central High, that there were some other issues that were not in the history books that were not being talked about, because on the surface of that book, that science book, there's a woman with her arms outstretched and she's nude. And you're like, well, why would I put a nude woman on the surface of a science book? Well, we need to think about science. We need to think about women. We need to think about what was taking place in the 40s and the 50s and what was happening in our medical industry. There's a woman by the name of Henrietta Lacks who lives in Baltimore, who was at Johns Hopkins University Hospital, and they basically found the cells that were still alive outside of her body. Hence, they created the HeLa cells, and they pulled these from her body, and they even extracted cells from her children to see if she's passed these genes on to them. And they basically had people built their whole careers off of her body, but never gave her any information that the fact that they did that, nor any compensation came to that woman for the study that was made off of her body. People's careers, doctoral dissertations, and everything was made off of this woman, and not one penny went to her, nor her family, nor her community, no one. Just imagine the millions upon billions of dollars, how that could effectively have affected a whole area if that money was actually put into the right place. Now think about it. That's just one facet. So when you hear people talk about reparations, that's what they're talking about. It's like a shift of America's economy to really go into fitting and creating the balance within a nation that is completely off balance, because we have generations of people affected by the sins of our forefathers and foremothers. That's what we have. So that's part of the dirge. That is part of the work that we must do collectively to figure out how do we solve that equation. This is a piece. The next year, 1958, integration of public schools in Norfolk, Virginia. 17 African-American youth exited out of the schools. They came in with their culture, their economics, their spirituality. They came in with a song upon their sleeve. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Those children came in, too, with that armor of God protecting over their bodies. And it was by the work by a guy by the name of Booker T. Washington and another guy named Julius Rosenwald. Had created a series of schools across the South called the Rosenwald schools, which I put at the top left of the compositional space. And they created these schools because they were trying to create a better space where African Americans could go to school. But when integration came about, many of those kids exited those schools and entered into the public school sector. But you also had one of the greatest moments in our nation of what was called white flight. Many of the white families took their kids out of schools and put them into the private sector. The private sector where they put them at was into the Catholic schools. That in the 50s and the 60s, that was an explosion of those schools that just grew. Again, it was another resegregation that was taking place in our nation. People who were resisting that integration. That has affected us, folks. That's the stuff that we need to keep pulling back the veil on, because when we talk about education now, you got to know where it happened before. We got to remember Sankofa. We got to remember that it's a dirge that's back there. It's ugly stuff. And guess what? Some of that stuff is repeating itself, and we have a new zoning has taken place and is happening in our political systems. We have a new zoning happening in terms of the way in which we're structuring and restructuring education. And one of the greatest litmus tests of that it took place in New Orleans at the Hurricane Katrina, when you had one of the greatest outbursts of the charter school system. People, it's all in front of us, and I got all the knowledge in the rooms every place I go, because there's mathematicians, there's historians, there's lawyers, there's all kind of people around, and it's like, how do we collectively use the gifts that we all have? I just happen to be the artist. I happen to be the truth sayer. I happen to be the one that's making a picture. I'm showing you the stuff, and I'm also speaking it to help us to remember the stuff. That's part of my job, but everybody else got another part of the job to do in this collective body in terms of what we call this faith center. How do we do this? We got to work together, folks, in order to make this thing happen. And then 1960, I'm taking you through time, going through back in time, but I want you to remember. And when the Greensboro Four sat down at that lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, those four guys were freshmen at North Carolina A&T. They left their dormitories and they went into Woolworth and they said, we're going to sit down at this counter and you're going to serve us because we have money and we need to be fed too. We're tired of going to the back door and going and getting food directly from the kitchen and having this little separate water fountains and stuff, and we got to drink out of water and getting the bad water while y'all getting the good fresh water. We're tired of having to go into the outhouse while y'all going to the nice bathroom inside. We're tired of going up in the balcony and looking down at the movie theater while everybody's sitting in the house and got the best seats. Everybody was tired of all the stuff that was going on, and this was all across the nation. People had to create green books to have a safe place for them to navigate. They couldn't just ride up in the city and say, let's just find a hotel and stay there. You couldn't do that. My professor who went to grad school going from New Orleans to Michigan, he had to stop at houses along the way that his mom said, stop at Mary Jo's house, stop at Bob's house, stop at Aunt Lucy's house, and call me when you get there, baby. That's what he had to go through. That's the story, and other people don't have that narrative. They can just go and show up in the town, find any hotel, yeah, you got a place to go. Yeah, oh yeah, fine, come on in, sir. Come on in, ma'am. But these brothers sat down at that lunch counter, and I would like to fixate on that woman on the right. And I'm fixated on her because she is in a posture I think that all of us are in when we are confronted with a dilemma. She has a dilemma. Does she serve those guys and lose her job? Does she not serve them, but know in her heart that she should, because they should better come to this counter and eat? She has a moral dilemma to deal with, and I think all of us have it. We're confronted with these dilemmas daily. And this is just one issue that's dealing with race. Let's throw women into the mix. Let's throw gender issues into the mix. We can keep throwing it in, and it's just going to get so big and so great. Now, it can get so big, so great, and then we get into this issue of, oh, I don't know where to begin. I don't know where to start. This is too much. It's overwhelming. I'm just going to eat a meal. But I'm saying we can't just do that, folks, because we must get up from our pregnant tables overflowing with bounty and be active in the lives of people, regardless of race, social, economic class. In this image is a pregnant table. Literally, it's pregnant. Now, of course, I had to guide you through it to see it. But if you look at the bottom, you'll see a head right here. She's like this. If you look at her breast, if you look at her belly, if you look at her left leg, her right leg, her vaginal region, the umbilical cord going up to a full-grown young man who stands at the table, unbeknownst to the people who are witnessing him there. They don't see him. They're eating a good old American meal of chicken and French fries. As they eat there, meanwhile, this commodified brother with Jim Beam, Smirnoff, Jack Daniels, and Nike, and all these different names of companies that get plastered upon the black male body within this nation, the way in which we commodify, bought and sold in the public sector, that is why he cannot be seen, because he's looked upon as a product still. That is the concept that comes out of chattel slavery that is still very much alive in our nation. And when we see these things happen, is because when we see a young man gets killed on the streets, is because they don't see him as their son. They don't see them as their brother. They don't see them as their father. They see them as other. There's a distance between. But let their son be out there in the street, He get treated like the guy who killed 9 people at Mother Emanuel Church, slain them, 18 years old and 87 years old. A grandson and a grandmother died in the same time in that church. The man who killed them, they caught him. They took him to lunch. Imagine a black man going into a white church and killing 9 white people. Imagine what it would be like to find him. And when they found him, I guarantee it, and I'll put my whole life on it, they would not be giving him a meal. I know this for sure, and I'll put everything I got. I'm not a betting person. I don't gamble. I will bet my entire life, everything on it. He would be beaten. He may not make it to the prison. But the reason why is because they would identify with that young man because they saw in them, they saw themselves. They saw the same eyes. They saw the same hair. They saw the same color or something. And they're like something that had some level of compassion in there that helped them. And it's not to say they should have beat him and killed him, but I'm saying it's about treating an equal care across the board. And if you're going to give one compassion, give compassion to everybody. Treat everybody with that same love. That's where we're supposed to be because that's what Christ said we should be. That's how we should treat one another. We should not cast those stones. Pick them up, throw them on the side, and treat everybody with the dignity of the life, no matter what problems or issues that they may have and what they may have done. We all have fallen short. We must get up from those tables because we have the keys and we have the hooks because Christ created us to be, or called us to be, Christ called us to be, fishers of men. And the hook is down on the bottom right for those who didn't see when I pointed on the other side. This is the bottom of a piece called a jazz song with a lot of blue notes. And I focused on this particular portion to share with you. It's because I wanted you to pay attention, not just because I was doing it because of tessellation of white and black inside the composition. I put that there because I wanted to deal with the issue of white and black. When we talk about slavery, too often the conversation about slavery is like, I'm so sorry what your people had to go through. As if black folks are the only one who went through the institutional slavery and the only ones who's bearing the weight of what took place there. No, we slaves, all of us. One may have been physically enslaved, but another may have been ideologically enslaved. So therefore, that's the same thing, I believe. It's the same level of dysfunction. It's the same level of pain and hurt. Because one is trying to live a life of denial, and one is trying to say, hey, hear me. This is what's happening. This is what's going on. No, that was the past. I'm not connected to that. That's not me. That's not me. I'm better than that. Or they try to find those few people in their family that did some good stuff. Well, my family was a little different than those rest of those families. We didn't do that. You can't detach yourself from an ecosystem that we're all affected by. You can't remove yourself from the equation and make like you some kind of outlier. Like, I'm over here. I ain't do that. I'm good. I go to church. I have a family. I love my children. You got to wake up. We got to wake out of. We got to break out of this crazy system of trying to remove the blame from us, each other, and just embrace it all. This is the dirge. I'm saying we got to embrace it all because that's where the true healing takes place. You know. Yes, we can. I am a man. Those things are connected. The story of that. When I talk about the dirge in the second line and still being alive, it's all embodied in the prodigal son story. That's Christ told it to us. He laid it out very clearly before us. You see, the prodigal son story is about someone who was dead, but now is alive. That's the premise of the story right there. Boom, boom. But of course, there's other layers to it, and I'm skipping over. You know that. But I took it and I made my own version of it. I created a hip-hop version of the prodigal son. Come on, baby, that's all in there. It's all in there, all that rhythm, because that's the rhythm I'm coming from. When you look at my artwork, that's the aesthetic that I'm coming from. That's why it's a little different from all the stuff that you might see, because I'm coming from that tradition. I was born in that. I was born in those sounds. That's why it's in my work. So I'm giving you a deeper dive into it so you understand where I come from and why I talk the way I talk, why I move the way I move. It's because that's my culture. That's what I saw every day. But I think that we also have something that's universal. Temptation is universal. It does not pick and choose who it's going to tempt. And so the sounds are coming from that television and going into the head of the young man. The fork and the knife is symbolizing the way in which it's feasting upon his mind. Instead of him eating a TV dinner, the TV is consuming him. And then the confusing signs that are embedded within his clothing. Is it S-A-V-E or is it S-E-X or is that S-I-N? Oh, is it L-O-V-E? No, is that L-U-S-T, L-S-T, L-O-S-T? Oh, it's got to be hope. H-O-P. No, that says dope. D-O-P-E. If you're looking down the rest of his arm for other words, they're not there. I'm messing with you now. The name of this piece is called Egg Halu, an expressive call to get one's attention. The second piece in the series of the prodigal son is exit wounds. He takes his inheritance and he leaves out into the world and he wastes away his inheritance and the money falls like confetti. He gets hooked upon drugs and he goes into this internal prison within his mind, and suicide becomes an option for him because he believes his life is useless. But there's a remnant that comes for him, that remnant that we put out in terms of prayer for our brothers and sisters, that remnant that we place upon the altar when we go to church, that remnant that we place on the altars in our own homes, that remnant that we pray every night for the people that we can't see, that we don't know, that remnant will reach them and go into their heart. Because our past may be stained. Our past may be stained, but our future is untouched. That's what we move into, brothers and sisters. And so literally inside this man coming back home and going into the embrace of his loving and wanting father upon this earth and in heaven that embraces and kills the fatted calf for him, and he holds and feels the warmth of his body and thanks all the servants who have been helping and tells his brother, your brother has returned. He was dead, but now he's alive. It is a rebirthing. It is the same rebirthing that Christ spoke to Nicodemus in the garden. And Nicodemus said, how can a man go back into his mother's womb? And Jesus replies like, no, son, no. I'm talking about a spiritual rebirth. And that's the rebirth that I believe that we must continue to reach for and search for in this nation. We need a rebirthing. We need a revival. So I want to show it to you that I literally put a pregnant. When I say things, I mean it. That's what's behind them. I just happen to paint it out in blue so you can see it. Because normally I'll point it out and most people say, I still don't see it. Like, it's there. So I'm telling you it's there. That's the relationship. We need to rebirth them. And we got evidence, brothers and sisters, evidence of the ways in which the arts have been used as the healing balm for our nation. In particular, the black music has been used that way for centuries. And it's an ongoing thing. It's a continuum, folks. And I'm not just speaking just about black music. I'm talking about music all around the world has been used this way for healing and restoration. This is the first panel, that long piece. It was small. I know you couldn't see it, but I wanted to show you the fact that this is all connected. The first panel, it goes all the way back to the time of slavery. It goes back to the field songs as the sisters down upon her knees in the cotton fields. And I still can hear her sing, I'm free. Praise the Lord, I'm free. No longer bound. No more chains holding me. Oh, she's singing of freedom as they're doing the Lindy Hop dances. The body is flowing through the air as I put feathers upon her back as if they're a symbol of the Holy Spirit, ascending away from this earth, ascending away from the pain just for a little while. Oh, yes, let us move together. Let us move in harmony. Oh, but I'm also telling you that from those fields, the same music and rhythms gets put into hip hop. And it showed up on Sedgwick Avenue in New York. A hip hop, a hip it to the hip, a hop, you don't stop. A rockin' to the bang bang boogie, say up, jump the boogie to the rhythm of the boogie to beat. Oh, it's all in there. It's the ways in which they took the old songs and recycled them and made new songs with them and blended them and gave us what we know as hip hop. It has been recycled over and over again, guys. It's the same information, it's the same music has been used for centuries and for generations that we must continue to work with because it's in rhythm and blues. As Minnie Riperton's on stage, loving you is easy because you're beautiful. Oh, yes, it is the sister who walks to the stage and says, I hear you. You're singing my song, girl. Keep singing it. Sing to me. Oh, help me. I'm feeling the pain and the pressure of my home. Oh, my husband is abusive to me. Oh, I feel the pain. Help me today. I hear you, girl. Sing my song. That's what the brother is on his piano, and the house rises up because as he plays those keys, he's playing his history and what he went through in terms of his life. That's why we connect with them. And when John Coltrane got on his horn and he began to belt out, a love supreme, a love supreme, a love supreme, a love supreme. Oh, I got a group that can't exist, but yes, but they exist because I made it. A love supreme. Esperanza Spoundy on the bass. A love supreme. Art Blakey on the drums. A love supreme. Yeah, a love supreme. A love supreme. See that ribbon rising up out of his horn? We see that ribbon is going to go out. It's going to touch the community. It's going to touch us all if we just bear but listen. You see, the earring on the woman, that is a symbol of Aya, which is an Adinkra symbol, which is a symbol of the fern, and it's a symbol of endurance. That is the African-American experience in my eyes. You see that ribbon? It's touching the housing projects of New Orleans. It's touching the housing projects of Chicago. It is touching the prison system, Sing Sing, in New York. As those sister from the right-hand side of the compositional space, she's going against the grain. Do what you wanna, hang out on the corner. Street music of New Orleans is also ringing into that sound. You go any place in the country, you hear the sounds, you hear the rhythms, and they move us, and they change, depending on what region of the world we go. But we must continue to sing that song together. We must continue to heal together. Come on, people, it's all in us. It's all in us. That's the size of the piece, so you get a fullness of the woodcut that I created. It's 40 feet wide, 4 feet tall, printed with a steamroller. Come on, baby, you got to go big or go home. This piece is the last one I'm going to share with you. Then I'm going to show you a rapid succession. I'm over my time, but please bear with me, brothers and sisters, that this image here is a representation, a symbol for my great-grandmother. You see, I pulled that section out that's on her lap all the way up to the top left. And as the story goes, my great-grandmother was caught up in indentured servitude in Louisiana. Now, for those who understand the definition of indentured servitude, the definition basically says that you have the ability to pay your debts and be set free. But if anybody has been a student of history, know that in the African-American community, in many instances, they never could pay the debt because they continued to give them bills that were greater than what they could pay and say forever stayed indentured to a master who wasn't the master. Now, I know that sounds a little bit convoluted, but that's what it was. Again, it's the stretching of the laws. It's the bending of the laws. It's that kangaroo court. It's the kangaroo nation. It's all these kind of things that we can talk about. That's what's been taking place. And so my great-grandmother decided to escape. She put on a hoop dress, and she took her 2 children, and she hid them underneath her hoop dress. And my great-grandmother, well, she walked to freedom. And you're like, well, why did she put the kids underneath her dress and walk away? Because they knew that my great-grandmother would not leave town without her children. We got to think about the social norms at that time. The woman's role was to take care of the children. The man's role was to do the work and provide for the family. So she knew if she left town, she needed to look like she was going, but she's going to come back. But she didn't come back. Well, one of those children underneath her dress was my grandmother. My grandmother goes on to give birth to my mother and 9 of her siblings. My mother gives birth to me and my 3 siblings. My great-grandmother, my grandmother, my mother, and my sister were all quilters. That's been passed on, taking those patches, taking those broken pieces, stitching them together, and still finding life. But guess what, friends? The quilting tradition, it is not just an African-American tradition, as we all know. It is a tradition that every single culture on the planet shares. All of us shares a patchwork quilt tradition. That is phenomenal to know. That little bit of information that generations of people all around the world knows how to take the lack and still find something out of it. Shoot, I'm thinking about the potato eaters. You talking about survival? Oh, my goodness. So, just go on and on and on. Around the world, people that had to do things in extreme. Well, that's what I came up in. I stepped into that continuum line and got hit upside the head. You're a black man. You African American. You live in the South. You're left-handed. I know that's an extra one. But I had to catch you with that. But it is true. Come on. It's a right-handed world, man. Come on now. So down her lap, it is a whole series of history. And one of them is the loving couple of Virginia in 1967 who conspired to get married, black woman and a white man. But they were denied that opportunity. At the very bottom, there's a letter L. Now, some people say, oh, what's the L? But that's why I'm here. You see, the L represents Linda Brent. And for those of you who know who Linda Brent is, she also went by the name of Harriet Jacobs. She wrote a book called Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. She escaped the overtures of her slave master for 7 years by hiding in the attic space of her grandmother's house. 7 years. And you're like, why in the world the woman stay there and not leave? It's because I connected it to my grandmother, my great-grandmother. She didn't leave because she had 2 children. She didn't want to leave the kids. She wanted to stay in close proximity to them, so she hid in a space that she can barely stand in and barely crawl around in for 7 years, escaping the overtures of her slave master. Look the book up and read it. That on the right, which is also in the composition, which is to the left of the compositional space, actually, is the church bombing in 1963, 1 month after the March on Washington, when the whole country was feeling a second line. Oh, the revival was near. And then, boom, an explosion takes place inside of 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. I want you to pay attention that there's one person standing inside of that building. I'm going to show you who she is in a minute. So I'm going to leave you, my friends, with a series of images of art in action. I'm going to talk really fast in rapid succession. The art in action. Lemonade, a picture of America. This is a piece that I worked with 12 students over the course of 1 month at William & Mary. I was hired by the institution to make a piece that commemorated the first 3 women, Briley, Brown, and Eli is their last names. They entered the school in 1967, and mind you, William & Mary is the second oldest university in the United States after Harvard University, 1693. These 3 women stayed in Jefferson Hall in the basement of that particular dorm on the campus. The sculpture I showed you in the first slide, that sculpture is in front of that dorm in honor of those 3 women. That's Sankofa, getting us to remember. I made this piece in the library. I made it with 12 students. The youngest was 18, the oldest was 70. This is a piece that we did commemorating the 9 people slain at Mother Emanuel Church. I worked with a musician by the name of Hannibal Lecumbe. Hannibal Lecumbe is a beautiful jazz musician located down in Texas, and he created this piece, and he hired me to create images for this particular event. And so I created these banners that are 12 feet tall, 2 feet wide, and they're all spiritual representations of the people that were slain at Mother Emanuel Church. You see the woman with the large purse in her hand to the left? I told you to remember that other piece because that's Sarah Collins. Sarah Collins is the lone survivor of the 16th Street Baptist Church. Sarah Collins is a sister of Addie Mae Collins. Sarah Collins and her sister and the other 3 girls come walking out of the bathroom, and all she remembers is, boom. They were just putting lip gloss on, dressed in their Sunday best. And a hole, gaping hole, is blown into the side of the church. Those parents, that community, all across the nation felt that dirge. This woman here went from an A student to an F student overnight because they didn't give her counseling. They didn't send her to any psychologist. They didn't take her out of school and give her homeschooling. No, they took her out of school for 1 month so she healed from her wounds and put her right back into school. The girl was traumatized. Every time she heard a car backfire, her heart would skip. But now, Sarah Collins is an evangelist. She's traveling all around the world spreading the message of love, of hope. And she came out to stand in the gap for those people who lost their families. And that's why we did this event as crucifixion, resurrection, 9 souls are traveling. And we did musical performances and dance, and we did something to translate them into sainthood. And those are the banners. Each one of the people's bodies across the bottom is a seed. That's the grandmother. The third one from the left, and the second one from the right is the grandson. I mispronounced the ages. He was 26, and she was 87. This is a project that was done at the SIVA conference. Over 200 people came on board. A few of those people are in this room that participated in this project. A white woman, a black woman, a native woman, working together, patching together the patchwork quilt of our nation. And all those voices at the bottom are the individual voices of our community coming together, working together, pulling the quilt, creating the circle, and dealing with the issues of our nation. This is SIVA, Christians in the Visual Arts. That's the organization I'm on the board with. I encourage you to join it. It is a beautiful thing, your churches, your organizations, to join with this particular organization because it is a beautiful way in which the artists of faith have an opportunity to work with other artists of faith. And we can work together and we can figure out other ways in which we can do things across this nation and around this world operatively to deal with different issues that we have in our communities. The arts have to play a major role in that work. And the Links Project is the last one I'll share with you. The Links Project, 1619 to 2019, 400 years anniversary of the first 29 Africans coming to Point Comfort, which is now known as Hampton. And we work with as old as 90 years old and as young as 10, gave them Dremel tools, and they made woodcuts. All different workshops. I worked with over 600 people for about 6 months and worked from 20 different countries and got involved in the project. We inked them up. We went outside the Wren building, which is the oldest continuous academic building in the United States at William & Mary, and we rolled a steamroller across the paper, and we made a print. And I called it links because we may think of incarceration or slavery, but I'm also wanting us to think about the links that are inextricable in terms of our lives. Peace be with you.